frame it around integrating culture and science and the way that we think about Hawaiian waters as kanaka. And so to set the tone and the intention for the rest of the year, for this whole seminar series and our studies of water, I thought we could start with an oli. So if we could all stand. This is an oli that honors our ancestors, asks for knowledge, and I think it's a really nice way to start by setting the intention. So we're going to do it 3 times. Feel free to just listen until you feel comfortable to join in. Eho mai pa. Eho mai kai ke mai luna mai e. O na mea una no ea o na mele. Eho mai e. Eho mai kai ke mai luna mai e. O na mea huna no ea o na mele. Eho mai e. Eho mai e. Eho mai kai ke mai luna mai e. O na mea huna no ea o na mele. Eho mai e. Eho mai e. Mahalo nui. So I titled my talk Kawai Ola. Vai is what so many of us study. Vai is water. Ola is life. So one way to interpret this common saying, Kawai Ola, is water is life. Right? Water brings life to our trees. Water brings life to our aina. Water brings life to us as kanaka. And in order to understand water and how Hawaiians think about water, there's a couple key players that we always start to think about when we think about vai. And especially this saying in particular, kawai ola. We think of Kane, right? Kane kawai ola. Kane, who's associated with fresh water and streams and different seasons and directions. Kane is a very holistic idea of this demigod of water, right? God Akua of water. But Kane in the Hawaiian perspective also means a bit more. Kane is associated with heat and energy and flow and penetration. So the fact that our rain is a Kane element is not just because it's fresh water. It's because Kane, that rain, penetrates into the subsurface or sediment. It penetrates in, right? There's a reason why our males are Kane. It's penetration that's involved with things that are named Kane. Kane also flows. Kane is energy. Kane is movement. Kane is heat. And when we think of Kane, we're thinking of our streams and our groundwaters because that vai is penetrating through rocks, right? It's penetrating and then it's bursting forth out again during springs. 10 points for anybody that can guess where this is. Is it close, but not quite? This is in the iliaina of Waipau. So Wai is water, Pau is that bursting forth of water. And so if we look into the names of our Ahupua'a, Vai and all these things associated with it, it tells us a lot about these Kane elements, right? Kane is penetrating, Kane is moving. And so understanding the context of Kane, that he's not just this one being, this God, in our understanding and our context of going through newspapers and trying to interface with community, our Kane elements is really speaking to the sources of our water. It's speaking to that energy and that flow of water through our subsurface. And it's speaking about the heat that is generated through those processes and interactions between water and rock. But we often don't see Kane alone. We see Kane with his brother. We see Kane paired with Kanaloa. Especially here in Manoa, we hear stories about Kane and Kanaloa all the time because they're these two brothers that love to drink ava, and so they went across this aina looking for water in order to put their o'o stick in order so they could drink ava, right? And they would put their ear to the ground and they would listen. And they would listen for the sounds of water. And so Kanaloa is often associated with oceans and voyaging and almost the opposite side of Kane. So there's this duality in Hawaiian thinking about water and where it comes from and its sources. And Kane is the penetrator, so Kane penetrates into Kanaloa at our muliwai. And this to me is a place that kind of exemplifies that mixing between Kane and Kanaloa to create life and something pretty magical. 10 points for where this is. Yeah, boom, done. Easy. That was an easy one. And so Kanaloa is not often referenced in the same way as Kane. Kane has so many genealogies that Kane Hoalani, which is the sun. You don't often see Kanaloa as a prefix, but Kanaloa is associated with health and healing and our sea life and abundance and all things that have to do with the ocean, right? So that interplay and interaction between Kane and Kanaloa is really important. And so I'm a really physical learner, and I know that a lot of us in here study water, and we've been studying probably the water cycle since we were little kids because it makes intuitive sense to us, right? We have our clouds, it comes down as rain, it penetrates, goes through, springs back forth, we create some kahawai, we have some streams, we go into the oceans, and that kawaiʻola creates life. And so the Hawaiian way of thinking of this, they actually break this down into many different levels of meaning. And so this is a video I don't actually ever show very often, but it breaks down the water cycle with reference to the 3 realms of knowledge. So here we're talking about everything above our head, papahulilani. And that's where we're making the clouds, and that's where the rain is coming. So there's Kane and Kanaloa forms in this space above our head. Now, there's another realm of knowledge, which is everything on the earth and in the oceans. And so the streams and our oceans are all papahulihonua, the earth and the oceans. But it's really important to understand that it's not just the elements and the sky, it's about life. So birthing new life is papahanaumoku, right? And that's all involved in the water cycle. That's our little interpretation of the water cycle with respect to Kane and Kanaloa. And Kane and Kanaloa play roles in all of those different realms, and you can analyze them in all different ways. Now, we saw rain, we saw streams, and we saw ocean, and we saw that interplay between waters and rock, but we also saw life, right? Life plays a really important part. And when you think about this process of life giving, you often have a female perspective. You have this female view. And so for me, it's hard to also talk about water without mentioning that female counterpart, Haumea. Haumea is the sister of Kane and Kanaloa. Kamakau writes about Haumea, Kane, and Kanaloa coming over on the canoe from Kahiki, right? Haumea, Kane, and Kanaloa are mentioned in the 8th stanza, the 8th va of the Kumulipo, where Haumea isn't actually called Haumea, she's called La'i, and she's born a woman. Ki'i, born a man. Kane, born a god. Kanaloa, born a squid. And so Haumea, to me, she's papa. She's woman, she's that fertility element. And she's described often as mo'o. Her kino lau are mo'o. And we see some common mo'o la'i, kane kua'ana, kiha wahine. These mo'o are really important because these mo'o are the controllers and the guardians of a lot of our freshwater sources. And so in Hawaiian thought, you can almost equate these mo'o and these mo'o names and these mo'o genealogies and these mo'o personalities to specific places and to specific springs, right? And so Haumea, in her mo'o form, is controlling how things flow. That mo'o is what's calling at that coastal ecosystem, that female mo'o, that mo'o wahine. A lot of mo'o are women, they're wahine, which means that there's so many cycles that are happening. When we're studying groundwater, we know that it's tidally influenced. We know that that lens moves up and down. And so we already can recognize that control and that regulation and that flux of water is more of a feminine type of control. And back in the day, when you wanted to call forth a spring, it was the females that would do that. And they would go and worship at a haleo papa, and they would call forth the mo'o of their place. And to me, this is really important because mo'o is our lineage, and these are some mo'o that are relevant to me in the places that I grew up in, and I'm from Meheanu, Hauahine, and what they're associated with. Mo'o is associated with this slime, this vale, that's also equivalent to that slime of giving birth and fertility. And a lot of stories about mo'o and mo'ohine have so many colors and smells associated with them that really calls forth all of this biological and life-giving imagery. Which brings us to the fact that Haumea is described as the birthplace. She's described as having she's the intersection points of places and chemistries that weave together. Haumea is reborn in every generation through the female line. And so if we dig really deep into that, we can almost think of Haumea as that mitochondrial element, that mitochondrial organelle that passes from mother to child, that continuation. And if we dig back even deeper into the history of cells and cell development, we can think of Haumea as that mitochondria, or where it evolved from, as a bacteria that was engulfed by an archaea. And so I like to think of Haumea as the origin point, the origin of life. She's a birth giver. And I think of her presence as microbes, as life, as the original root of life, so much life in these waters and these places that are guarded by mo'o, that have all these connections to chemistry and flow and hydrology. And so framing this all together, we can see Haumea exists, at these intersection points. Calling upon Haumea is thinking about how these water sources were regulated, what their cycles were, and also thinking about that biological impact on these water systems. And that's what really intrigues me. I'm all about Haumea and I'm all about mo'o because kawai ola. If you think of this in another way, so Hawaiians have many ways to look at things. They have different layers. You could also think of this as, rather than water is life, but you could think of this as living water. Our water is not just giving life, but our water in and of itself is alive. And those waters have properties that can make or break your Ahua ecosystem, your agriculture, and your sustenance and sustainability. And so the way I think about kawai ola is I think about all the microbes, that Haumea elements that you cannot see, all the microbes that exist in this space of living water, and trying to interrogate and understand that microbial mo'oku auhau, that genealogy of these tiny, tiny organisms that live there, so that we can better connect to our places, connect to all of those intersecting points of Haumea, Kane, and Kanaloa, and move forward. So Microbes, right, these hidden things that we can't see, are some of the most dominant organisms on our planet. They're found everywhere. There are about 5 times 10 to the 30 microbes on our planet. If we were to take all of them, put them on a scale, the mass of all the microbes would be 3,000 times the mass of humans on the planet. So they're very abundant, and they play really, really important roles in driving the biogeochemical cycling of all these different elements. And so they are the key reason that our Earth is habitable for us today, right? They are the life givers to our planet Earth so that we can survive. They've provided, microbes in the ocean have provided over half of the oxygen that we breathe, and they continue to cycle these elements over and over and over. Microbes shape ecosystems from ridge to reef, and so microbes are really important all along these different realms where these different deities, these different elements exist in shaping specific ecosystems across Ahupua'a. So I study the microbial dynamics of our waters. I study Kawaiʻola. I study that living water in trying to understand who's there. Who are these microbes? What is their composition? What is their community structure? Is it different between places? It's kind of like going out and taking a census of the community. I study what do they do. I'm interested in what their jobs are in this realm that they're living in. Are they a garbage man or a politician? What is their role? And most importantly, I'm interested in how fast they're actually metabolizing, how fast they're doing their job, because that's the part that's going to make an impact, right? You can have 2 garbage guys in Kailua, and those uncles are super on it. Your garbage always gets picked up on time, super efficient. Or you could have 14 garbage guys in Kaneohe, right? And they're kind of lazy, and they like talk on the job, and nobody's trash picks up on time. And so understanding how fast and how efficient these organisms are working tells you a lot about what the system is doing. And I study these microbes across our Ahupua'a ecosystem. And so there's a lot of different dimensions to an Ahupua'a. An Ahupua'a is basically a parcel of land that's running from mountain to sea that is wide enough to carry all of the resources to support the community within there. Runs from forested areas through traditional integrated farming systems down to our coastal ecosystems where we have a fish pond type aquaculture. And so if you can see from this bird's eye view, we've kind of been looking at a cross section, and we will for a while, but there's a lot of different spatial and temporal aspects to studying microbes across an Ahupua'a. And that's pretty much what I do. So most of my research is interested in looking at how microbes mediate the cycling of nutrients and elements to prime our different pieces of land for food production or clean water production. And so we work in the groundwater aquifers, from the mountain to the sea, across land in traditional agriculture in lo'i systems, and out to the coast with traditional aquaculture in local ecosystems. So I'm going to focus majority of my talk here today in the biogeography of aquifers, because and I'm going to keep coming back to this theme of mo'o, because wanting to understand our aquifers has this mo'o element to it, right? Mo'o are controllers of waters, but mo'o also means lineage. So understanding our water is important for passing it down our lineage. And before I go any further, it's really hard to study water by yourself. You can't do that, and it takes a lot of people, a lot of community organizations, a lot of access, and a lot of work to make that possible. And so here's just a couple pictures of us and the team in the field, and just a few. This is no by near a comprehensive list of everybody that we've worked with, but just to show you how many people are involved in this big project to really understand water. So this project of Ikewai, Ike is knowledge, wai is water. And so trying to understand where is our water coming from, where is it going, how is it connected, how can we use it so we can sustain that water into the future. And so one of the reasons why we're interested in this, right, is because we want to drink clean water. And our groundwater resources are threatened every single day by overpopulation and overconsumption, different types of land management, and different types of management of pulling water. And so it changes our water quality because now we can bring kanaloa into our kane, right? Now we can bring some salt water, which totally ruins the drinkability of our water sources. And we can drink so much that we can pull in so much salt water that this is no longer sustainable. And so it's really important to understand the water quality of our systems in order to make good decisions about water management. And what we want to do in this project is to actually be able to provide decision makers with appropriate tools so that they can make better decisions about water, so that we can maintain the sustainability and the clean, delicious vaimomona that our island has to offer. Now, when we're thinking about water quality, we often are scared of microbes because when we think about microbes, we think about microbes as these bad guys. But I was talking about microbes in the context of haumea, these life-giving, these life-transforming, these elements that play at the intersection. And so the water quality that we measure is often driven by the microbial composition that lives there. And 40% of all microbes on our planet actually live in this subsurface aquifer space. So there is a lot of microbial processes and actions and jobs happening in this space that we can't see, and they're really important for the ecosystem services in this emploi, or in this space. So yes, there are some microbes that can be contaminants, and those are the ones that we often focus on, right? We are a very vain species. We focus on the guys that can kill us and hurt us and make us sick. Nothing against that, but microbes are often really good guys. And so we can identify and quantify those pathogens, those bad guys. But I'm more interested in the good guys, because when we have good, healthy, robust microbial communities in our subsurface aquifers, they can actually help be the first line of defense for those pathogens from making a home there. Right? We talk about our own microbiome and our gut microbiome and probiotics and eating yogurt and drinking kombucha. The same thing happens in the environment, right? And so if we have a strong microbiome that exists, these microbial communities, they are the first line of defense, they're the security guards, and they bounce those pathogens right out the door. And so they can actually help maintain much healthier water systems. And so we're trying to understand who those guys are and how we maintain a healthy subsurface microbial community. Now, microbes are also really cool because they're very sensitive. Microbes can be used as a tool to detect contaminants. And so sometimes it's really costly and very expensive to go out and measure those contaminants, those chemical contaminants that are in our water sources. But a microbe, because it's so small, is very sensitive to those changes in chemistries. And so a microbe can actually, if we know the right guy, they can help inform us. If they're there and alive and eating and happy, we know that there's some sort of contamination. So we can actually exploit our knowledge of who's there to help us better understand what that chemical composition and those potential contaminants might be. And the great thing is that microbes are often the key players in cleaning up those contaminants. So not only can they detect them, but because they are their food source, they can help to convert those contaminant chemicals into less toxic forms. And so microbes are really, really good guys. We like microbes a lot. And so I do the same thing as all of my other research, And when we're looking at microbes in groundwater, we're trying to understand who they are, who is their community, what are they composed of, who are all the guys, how diverse is their community, because the diversity is going to allow them to better prevent pathogens and contaminants from coming in, and how dense those populations are, how many people, microbes, are living in a particular place. And by analyzing these microbes over time and space, they can tell us a lot of different things, right? So if we're just looking at who's there, across time, we can look at that succession of community members. Across space, we can identify possible sources of contamination and link that with land management or resource management uses. If we look at diversity and how related the communities are, across time, we can start to get an idea of the ecological impacts of some of our activities, or even climatic impacts. And if we look across space, we can get an idea of the biogeography of these microbes and how different species partition them across different niches. And we can start thinking about the connectivity of these different water sources. And if we look at density, again, across these different parameters, we see that we can start building a bigger picture of our aqua ecosystems and our water resources as a whole. And so our main questions that we're trying to address, and we're using microbes as a tool to do this, is looking at the connectivity of these aquifers, right? That's a really important question, because if we're going to try and start development in a certain area, we want to make sure that we're not pulling water that is actually coming from another place, right? And so we want to make sure that our yield calculations are appropriate. The source and flow, we can use microbes as tracers to try to help us constrain the sources and flows of where that water is moving. We can also use microbiology to help us assess the water quality and the impact of land management on our water resources, right? Because microbes can tell us a lot about the types of contaminants that might be there, what's happening in the subsurface. And they're really, really important for coastal ecosystem health. And so when we think about this in a traditional Hawaiian lens, right, we're talking about kane that's coming down. And we can get an insight into kane and kane's processes using some of our haumea techniques with microbiology. And haumea is the regulator and the controller of a lot of these water sources. And so by using microbes and studying some of these processes and thinking about mo'o, it helps us to kind of better understand the water quality and the impact of our management on these sources. And as these water sources penetrate into common law, right, we can understand how important it is for communities that exist here, or the chemistries that's coming from the water, and how that relates to calling in the fishes, or what's the coastal reef health and structure. So all of those coastal ecosystems are really, really dependent on a lot of subsurface submarine groundwater discharge. So this project is based in multiple sites, and I just want to tell you a couple little mo'o stories about some of our sites, since we're framing around mo'o today. And so one of our sites is the Pearl Harbor Aquifer. It's a pretty big aquifer. Kumulili Kala talks about our moku and our divisions of districts. So this would be moku Eva, pretty much. She hypothesized that our moku is actually, rather than terrestrial land boundaries, she hypothesizes that our moku, because it's related to haumea and mo'o, is actually designations of underground water boundaries. So something to think about. But one of the most prominent mo'o in Pearl Harbor is Kane Kua'ana. And so Kane Kua'ana was from Puloa, and she was a very attractive mo'o. And so when she was around, the male fish were all super attracted to her. So they swam in. And so whenever the mo'o was present, whenever she was present, there would be fish. And then whenever she would leave, the fish would follow her because she was super attractive. And she was particularly important in Pearl Harbor because she was associated with the oysters. And so I just learned this recently, that Pearl City, the reason why it's called Pearl City in Pearl Harbor is because there were so many oysters and the pearls that they made, and you could see them like shimmering. Pearl City, crazy. So lots of oysters in this area, and Kane Kua'ana was the mo'o that was responsible. So when you wanted more fish or you wanted more prolific oysters, the women of this area would go and call forth Kane Kua'ana. What's interesting to note is that there were quite a bit of local i'a across this area. Local i'a are fish ponds, and fish ponds require vai sources, that mixing of fresh water into kanaloa to create this space to grow fish. And those 31 local i'a spanned 1,200 acres. So there's a huge amount of water in this moku. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of these ahupua'a are named vai names. There's so many different vai names in Mokuo Ewa, and a lot of that vai is associated as vai hau, which hau is for haumea, which relates back to the mo'o. And Lilikala estimates that there's about 10 springs per acre in this area in particular. So there's a lot of water coming from this area, and today we don't necessarily understand how it's all flowing and where it's all coming from, and so that's one of the big questions and points of this project, is to better understand that in the context of what we knew and how to move forward so we can restore it. The other ahua that we work in, or the aquifer system, is in Hualalai. So we work in the Hualalai aquifer in Kona, and we look at the Kiholo and the Keauho ahua, and we've done a lot of engagement with community there, and we've done a lot of sampling there to better understand some of these questions from a microbial, from a chemistry, from a hydrologic, from a geophysics perspective of where the water's flowing. And I want to let some of the kia'i, the stewards of these places, share a little bit about their mo'o that's related, because on Oahu, mo'oahine are often associated with the color yellow, but that's not the case in Kona. So here we are at Kaloko, Lokoi'a, and she's talking about their mo'ohine, Kihavahine Ikiana Nea, and the way that they know the presence that their mo'o is in the pond is there's a red, orange film that crosses the water associated with the ma'i of that mo'ohine. And that makes a lot of sense to me as a microbiologist, because Kona, or even a geologist, right? Kona has a lot of fresh lava fields, for sure, newer lava fields. And Kane is penetrating through raw iron, pretty much, right? And so it's bringing a lot of dissolved iron likely out as it's discharging and penetrating into Kanaloa. And as Haumea gets involved, those microbes are basically breathing oxygen, eating that dissolved iron, and pooping out rust, which is where you get that red color, and it's associated with blood, right? And blood and iron and all of these things kind of go together. And we'll hear the same kind of imagery of the red more in North Kona at Mauna Lani.
And he said, Kane, and when he's getting the street, when you hear their sounds, it's
Why does that sound like a mo'o?
but this pond when we built our ahu that time and we dedicated it, you know, we did sunrise service, we had ceremonial foods, and then John told us usually you put the ceremonial foods in the ocean after you're done. And since we had a mo'ohini, we opted to do it first. So, you know, we had our ceremonial thing, and we're at our cottage over there, puppy stories, and then we're having lunch, and then we look on the table and we have our foods still in the basket. We didn't give it to her. And Daniel Hotdog's son, he said, well, what side of the water? This pond was glass. And right down the middle, a red streak. So we looked at the mahi.
Yeah.
I said, oh, she's mad. So we came out, Daddy took the food, so we came out here. And he said, we're going to offer it to her, but when we leave, do not look back.
Yeah.
So we went back there, it was quiet for like an hour.
Yeah.
And then, of course, his son was looking, hey, look at the water, you know, going on. And it was kind of just disappearing. There was no current, right? It was kind of fizzled out. Yeah, she's happy.
Oh.
So that's the one I.
So here we are at Kalahuipua'a Lokoi'a in the Mauna Lani Resorts with Anakala PE. And I just wanted to show these clips of these kia'i actually sharing their stories about mo'o because it's so important and it's still really relevant today in how we work with our communities, especially in studying water. Water is so important and essential for a lot of their practices, and they still think about it framed in our traditional perspective, right? Kane, kanaloa, haumea, the mo'o protocols. So I wanted them to speak with their own voices, to share a little bit so you could have some insight into the mo'o of these different places associated with where we are settling.
The University of Hawaii's Ecology EBSCO project is performing and integrating cutting-edge hydrological research to assess the current status and predict future scenarios for water availability in Hawaii. The mission of EKY is to ensure Hawaii's future water security through the integration of research, education, and engagement of community to develop effective decision support tools that improve water policy, planning, and stewardship for the state. Our project aims to answer the following questions. Where does our water come from? How is subsurface geology linked to that water storage? What is the degree of connectivity between our aquifers? What is the volume of subsurface groundwater discharge along the coast? And how does water quality impact coastal ecosystems?
So I jumped the gun pushing the button a little bit, but this is our dance interpretation of this whole project and the questions that we're trying to answer. And so there's some very basic questions that a lot of the stewards, a lot of the kia'i, a lot of the community members have when it comes to water, especially when water becomes limited. So when we were in Kona, up on the Hualalai Ridge, they were at a 25% water restriction because some of the wells were down. And so these issues are very relevant, and studying these processes and using novel techniques with microbiology and these new geophysics techniques, we're starting